Hey, what's up you guys, it's Connor. Today we're going to be doing an individual book review for Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. If you guys don't know, this is the second book that follows Skyward. I did an individual book review for the first book, so I'll leave that up in the card symbol if you want to check it out. The direction that this series starts going in this book makes it almost impossible to talk about without spoiling the first book. So if you have not read the first book, go read the first book, come back, or watch my review. This review is also going to have very, very minor spoilers for this book just because the blurb literally tells you nothing. The blurb gives you a couple of things that happen in the first book and that's it. I'm not going to give away major things or anything like that, but I will talk about some of the new characters and some of the new places that we see. So keep that in mind if you don't want to know anything before you go into this. Maybe don't watch this until after you've read the book. We're gonna just jump into the review. In this one, we're still following Spensa, who survives the first book, so that's spoiler number one. The civilization of Igneous, which is the major city that Spensa lives in on Detritus, has expanded their defense system. They've actually expanded into the belt of platforms that surround the planet. At the very, very beginning of the book, an alien with purple skin crashes on Detritus, and Spensa and the alien have about a minute conversation, maybe. What results is that Spensa takes that alien's place to try to infiltrate the Superiority, which is the name of, hi bud, the Alliance ship, the Empire, I guess, that has been keeping the people on Detritus trapped. Her goal is to find a hyperdrive, steal the hyperdrive, bring it back to Detritus, and allow her people to escape Detritus. The last couple of things before we jump into my pros and cons is that this book starts off about 6 months after the ending of the first book, and you also find out that there's another threat besides the Superiority, which is called a Delver, and Delvers are the beings that come in and destroy everything around. They're like these giant black hole creatures that are the reason why Spensa and people like her are a bit dangerous. That's like the first 50-ish pages, maybe a little bit more. So sorry if you are offended by that, but it's so hard to talk about anything like pro or con related without that base knowledge being there. My first pro for this book is that I really appreciated that Spensa's character hasn't changed completely. At the end of the first book, she confronts the reason why she's so intense, but I liked that she kept that somewhat in this book. She has those conversations, those really intense, like bloodthirsty phrases that pop into her mind, and I'm glad that those are still there, because if she had changed completely from the first book, it would have been like following a completely new character from scratch. I like that she is put in this very new situation where she is definitely a fish out of water and she doesn't really know what she's doing. This is not something that she is trained for. In the first book, she is working towards something that she's wanted for her whole life, so she's been preparing for becoming a member of the DDF. But in this book, she hasn't prepared for what she's trying to do. She's trying to become a spy, basically, and she has no experience with doing that, and I'm glad that she does struggle a lot trying to keep up this farce of being this purple alien. So I am glad that she does make mistakes along the way. It actually made it a lot more entertaining to follow her because it raises the stakes every time she makes a mistake. It's one of those things that it just drives the tension up and it makes you just keep reading and keep reading and keep reading to find out what is going to happen. Is she going to get caught? At what point will things come crumbling down? Read and find out. My second pro for this book was that I was surprised, and pleasantly so, that they took the story away from Detritus. I was fully expecting for this second book to be completely about Detritus and fleshing out Detritus and fleshing out the culture that has formed there with Igneous and all these different groups of people that used to be very nomadic, all settling together, and the politics of Detritus and everything like that. I still am interested in learning those things, and I do think that they will be explored in the future of the series, but I do appreciate that they take this book and go completely outside of Detritus. They go to the Superiority, they go to this space station, and they explore that culture a lot, which was really interesting. This book does a good job of setting up a wider world where we don't really know all that much about Detritus and how it's set up, besides the fact that if you're called a coward, that is the worst thing ever. Here we get to learn why the humans are trapped on Detritus and how all of the other species in the universe view humans and how that's set up. Exploring this new place and exploring these different species was something that I was really enjoying, just because we know that there are other species. We know that the Krell have been keeping the humans trapped on Detritus for a very, very long time, so it was nice to see the other side and see how humans are viewed in the galaxy. One thing that I thought was a little bit weird was that this place that we go to, it's called Starsight. That's why it's called Starsight. You find that out at the very beginning as well, so not a spoiler. Starsight is very autonomous. Like, they make a lot of big important decisions, but there are a lot of other places and a lot of other stations around the galaxy and everything like that. So it was strange that they had so much power just on this one base. I don't even know what it's called, but that was just like one random thought I had while reading. I thought it was really cool that we got to learn about cytonics and learn about the people that are able, like Spensa, to jump from place to place without actually traveling the distance between. And seeing Spensa trying to figure out her cytonic abilities as well as trying to steal this hyperdrive had me trying to figure things out ahead of time and make guesses and everything like that, so that part was a ton of fun. My biggest pro for this book is probably exploring the society of the superiority, the society that's on Starsight. In contrast to Detritus, where it's really terrible to be called a coward and you have to show that you are very brave and very courageous, almost to a fault. In the superiority and on Starsight, it is viewed as extremely awful to be aggressive. So it's almost like Detritus is an example of you being really reckless and being overly aggressive was a good thing, where on Starsight it was the exact opposite, and being very calm and well-mannered and all of that stuff was viewed as being in the right. And it showed in this book and in the previous book how having only one side of that equation, of that range, has big consequences. The society on Starsight has a lot of very thinly veiled racism, and that is all explored. The three main species within the superiority dismiss all of the lesser species as aggressive, and that's how they withhold giving the lesser species more power and more autonomy. It allows the three main species to retain authority and not share it, and it gives them an excuse not to listen to what the other species are saying. People of the three main superior species will be like, oh my, or like will jump back if someone says something too aggressive, or will say something like so aggressive and dismiss the person who's bringing up a valid point, which is exactly how people have been treating minorities within at least the United States and many other places around the globe. It makes groups of people and it makes the lesser species question themselves and almost like gaslight themselves into thinking that there's something wrong with them or thinking that there's something wrong with what they're trying to accomplish. Anytime that a lesser species speaks up or defends themselves, they always get squashed as being aggressive, and I thought that that was very relevant today. The only way and hope for these lesser species to gain more autonomy and to gain more power is to mold themselves into acting exactly like the greater species or the superior species act. So I thought that was really interesting because that's very one-to-one. And historically, white people have taken minority groups' children away from them and have like whitewashed them and tried to make them more white. That happens in this book as well. I thought that that was really, really interesting and well done, and the message was very like, this is bad. So I appreciated that. It was interesting that the lesser species had a little bit more wiggle room to behave. The greater species had a lot more restrictions on what they could or could not do. And I thought that it was interesting that Spensa as a lesser species, or some of the other characters, were able to get away with being a little bit more aggressive, being a little bit more outside the norm because they were of a lesser species. My next pro is that I did enjoy the characters that are introduced into this book. Because we only have Mbot and Spensa and Doomslug that carry over into this one, there are a couple of chapters that are set on Detritus, but not many. So we needed a whole new cast of characters to follow and cheer for. I really liked Hesho, which is a Kitsen, which is basically like a little gerbil fox species that has interacted with humans in the past. He was definitely the most quirky of the bunch because he's former royalty. There's Moriamer, who is one of the superior species but doesn't act like one of the superior species. They're a little bit more aggressive than they are supposed to be, so thought that they were really interesting. Vapor is a figment, so basically you can't see Vapor, but she has certain smells. And probably the last main character that we follow is Blade, which is another human. Because they're all from different species, sort of, because Spensa's pretending to be a different species, they all have to respect each other's cultures, or at least start to learn about one another, even though they at first don't want to. So I liked seeing all of those things and seeing these new characters start to interact and start to understand each other and invest in each other. to various degrees. And my last pro that I'm going to talk about is that I do like the ending of the book. The book has a bit of a cliffhangery ending, but the book itself is very satisfying. It just makes me want to continue on and read the next book whenever that comes out. As for cons, I only had a couple. The first is that this book starts off quite slowly because Brandon takes this story in such a different direction. It takes some time and some pages to get Spensa to Starsight so that they can start this plot. So it did slow it down a little bit, but it wasn't that huge of a con. Another con was that the characters from the first book are basically forgotten. There's a couple of chapters that we jump back to Detritus and see what they're doing there, but we don't really get to see the characters in any sort of depth. I do like that we got to explore the wider universe, but I do still wish that we got to learn more about the side characters from the first book. I'm sure that they will be explored in the future. And those few chapters that we do go back to Detritus almost felt like an afterthought, like, oh, I'm taking this story back, or I'm taking this story in a different direction for the third book, so I gotta make sure that people are still understanding that Detritus is doing things while this book is taking place. I'm not even really sure if they needed to be there because they didn't really do all that much. I mean, there's like one main thing that happens, but I don't know. And since this book did have chapters that went back to Detritus, I wanted to know more about Alanique. Alanique, I think is how you pronounce the alien's name that has lavender skin. We don't really learn very much about her at all. I wish that we had, but again, that wasn't a big con. In the end, I adored this book. I liked the first book, but I think that this book was even better than the first one. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I highly recommend it if you're interested in it at all. I think some of the things that it explores with Mbot are really, really interesting, but I'm not going to tell you about them. You can just read it for yourself. Because I really had no idea that this book was going to go in this direction, I have no idea what the third book is going to entail, so I'm very much looking forward to finding out what happens next. And yeah, Starsight. So that's going to be my review of Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up and comment down below if you've read this book already. Did you read the first book and are now more excited to read the second book? Who was your favorite new character that we got to explore in this one? I think I really enjoyed Mortimer. I just feel like that character was a lot more complex than a lot of the characters that we've been following in this series so far. Anything else you want me to know, leave it down below and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye. Nookie. Nook, you want to say bye? Say bye. Sorry, buddy.